Hey, welcome to the Protein Masterclass, where I'm going to be speaking on protein's role in helping us preserve as much muscle mass as possible during a fat loss phase. A lot of us understand and have an idea about why protein is so important, why muscle, you can see that protein's on my mind, why muscle mass is so important. But I'm going to give you some hopefully new perspectives on why we want to keep as much muscle as possible, whether we're going through a fat loss phase or not. But I'm specifically going to speak on a fat loss phase today, and a little bit of general education on protein, and then more specifically on why protein is so valuable to us, the ingestion of protein while we're in a fat loss phase, as it speaks to keeping as much muscle as possible. So as you're probably already guessing, plays a key role in allowing us to keep as much muscle mass as possible, especially during a fat loss phase. We always need protein, we always need to be ingesting it, and we always are ingesting it if we're eating food, which I'm sure all of you are, just to recycle tissue, to rebuild tissue. But this takes on an even more important role, this recycling, rebuilding of new tissue, when we're in a calorie deficit for a fat loss phase. So, protein is going to allow us to keep as much muscle mass as possible. And I've seen this firsthand. In my experience working with people for almost 10 years, I've seen clients who've gone through a fat loss phase with adequate amounts of protein and have stuck to that really well and kept as much muscle as possible, in large part because of that protein content. And clients who wanted to get the weight off faster didn't always stick to the protein levels that we had set out and saw what that did to their muscle mass. And as you can probably guess, it made it a lot harder for them to keep their muscle mass, and a lot of the times they didn't. So let's start out from a high level perspective on what protein is. Protein is made up of building blocks called amino acids. And amino acids are essential for a number of processes that occur within our bodies. So, amino acids can either be termed non essential or essential. Essential amino acids are what we need to ingest through our diet, through proteins. Non essential amino acids are what we can build within our bodies, synthesize within our bodies without outside food. Okay, so um, just a quick definition on both of those. Amino acids are so important because they help to rebuild tissue. We need to do that because we're always breaking down tissue. It's not that visible tissue, it's what's going on within us. And there's a lot more going on within us than we could ever imagine. Amino acids also support the immune system, so help bolster immune function. They play a role in hormone and enzyme production, and they help to transport nutrients through the body. So, amino acids are very important. How do we take in these amino acids? Again, if they're non essential, our body builds them. If they're essential, we need to take them in through our diet, and they're taken in through protein, which we're all eating protein, regardless if we're animal based, whole foods based, plant based. Every food has protein. There's just differing qualities and quantities of proteins found within foods, but every food has protein within it. So as long as you're eating food, you're getting protein, but there is an optimal amount of protein to be eating to preserve muscle mass, especially during a fat loss phase, which we will get into. So let's first talk about muscle and why it's important, at least just for a little bit here, because we're talking so much about, well, we want to preserve muscle during fat loss. Why do we want to preserve muscle? Like, how important is muscle? The reasons why, beyond just the aesthetic, beyond just it makes us look better. So, there's a lot of roles muscle plays within the body. It's even considered an organ now, and probably one of the coolest and most essential organs, though we're pretty much done if we lose any of our organs. So they're all pretty damn cool. But muscle in particular helps to boost our metabolism. It takes a lot of energy in the form of calories to just maintain muscle mass. So its resting energy need is high. That means having more muscle mass turns us into more of a furnace. More of the calories that we ingest are going to be used by the muscle. That means they can't go to be building fat. So that's a great part. Um, Muscle supports activities of daily living, whether that's you're into strength training and lifting weights. It's going to have obviously essential role in that. That's usually why we lift weights. But even in tasks of picking things up off the ground, running, being mobile, and this becomes especially true as we get older. We want to build muscle mass when we're younger to give us the best chance of preserving that when we're older, because it becomes harder and harder to build muscle every decade we age, and more important to have muscle every decade we age. Of course, there's a sweet spot. We don't need a ton of muscle as we get older, but usually until we get into the extremes, the more muscle we have, the better. Muscle looks great. Already touched on that. It makes people look really good. Again, there's a sweet spot here, but for most of us, putting on a little bit of muscle is going to make our bodies look better. And then muscle helps improve insulin sensitivity as well. So we ingest carbohydrates, it gets broken down into glucose, blood sugar. Blood sugar runs through our veins, and it needs to be deposited somewhere. Muscle mass is a great sink for glucose or blood sugar because it can take a lot of it, and this is going to help keep us more balanced, our energy levels more balanced when we intake high amounts of carbohydrates. Okay? So if muscle is this important, how do we preserve as much of it as possible? Well, there's 3 key ways. One of them that we're going to be touching on in depth today is the amount of protein we're eating at any point, but specifically during a fat loss phase. How slow we do a fat loss phase, that's going to play a big role on how much muscle we can or cannot maintain. And then strength training and how we're strength training. I'm only going to cover protein today, but I will go through the other 2 variables in more depth in the future. So if we want to lose fat, look leaner, look sexier, more toned, and a large part of looking that way is muscle mass, we better do as much as we can to keep our protein as high as possible, or high enough in order to maintain as much of that muscle mass as possible. So again, every day our body's going through the recycling of waste products, the removal of waste products, breaking things down, rebuilding new tissues, and it's the amino acids that are playing a very big role in this. Again, the amino acids are being brought into our body in large part from the food we eat. Our body is very good at maintaining homeostasis, which in this case means the balance between breaking down and rebuilding. So when we're in a calorie deficit is needed in order to lose fat and lose weight. We are reducing the amount of energy that's coming into our body. We need to do that to lose fat. But as we're reducing the amount of energy that's coming into our body, we're reducing the resources our body has to use to do these processes of breaking down, recycling, and rebuilding. Okay? So if our body doesn't have as many resources it needs for essential processes, it's going to find a way to get those resources, right? Our body's very intelligent. It's not just going to, unless we're at a severe calorie deficit for very long periods of time, our body's never not going to get the resources that it needs for essential products or processes. And unfortunately, maintaining muscle mass is not at the top of its list. We all wish it was, but it's not. So if the body is already in a calorie deficit and it needs more resources, it will pull them from muscle tissue. And this is why it's possible to lose muscle mass during a fat loss or a weight loss phase. This isn't ideal because we want to keep as much muscle mass as possible. So what do? Well, we can give our body more resources in the form of protein then amino acids, in order to do the essential tasks it needs to do, therefore minimizing its need to break down lean tissue aka muscle mass. Okay? So let's cover now how much is enough. Okay, how much protein is actually enough to ensure you preserve as much muscle mass as possible during a fat loss phase? Well, it does depend on how big you are, how much muscle mass you have, um, how intensive the training you are doing. But for most people, they're going to be in the sweet spot between 1.6 to 2.2 grams per kilogram of your body weight. This would convert to 0.73 to 1 gram per pound of total body weight. So if you weigh 200 pounds, the upper end would be 200 grams of protein per day that you need to ingest. The lower end would be 150 grams per day that you need to ingest. And this would give you very likely the adequate amount of protein that you need to maintain as much muscle mass as possible during that fat loss phase. Where it does differ a little bit, and I'll touch on quickly, is if you have a ton of muscle mass, or if you're training very, very hard, or if you just want to give yourself the absolute best chance to maintain as much muscle mass as possible during the fat loss phase, you can up that amount of protein a little bit to 2.3 to 3.1 grams of protein per kilogram of lean mass. I'm going to get into what lean mass is, or 1.05 to 1.4 grams per pound per day of lean mass. Okay, there's a difference between lean mass and total body weight. Lean mass is total body weight minus fat mass. So if we're talking about a 180-pound male who's 12% body fat, 12% body fat could be found through body fat testing like a DEXA scan or a hydrostatic method, but not super important here. So if 180-pound male, 12% body fat, that person has 158 pounds of lean mass. That means they're highly muscled, and their protein during a fat loss phase should be about 166 grams to 222 grams per day. So that's a little bit higher than the recommended amount for people with less muscle mass. So abiding by those guidelines would give you the best chance of preserving as much muscle as possible during a fat loss phase. Okay. But beyond eating enough protein or an adequate amount to give us the best chance to keep as much muscle during a fat loss phase as possible, protein also has two other fairly essential roles in helping us during our fat loss phase. And one of them is protein's role in satiety and appetite control. So protein provides a powerful satiety effect. And what that means is it helps make you feel full and satisfied after eating it. Okay? This might not seem like a huge deal, especially if you're just starting out on a fat loss phase. And if the fat loss phase is fairly moderate right now, meaning your calories aren't too low. But trust me, it matters a ton once you're 12 weeks into a fat loss phase, you're 700 or 1,000 calories below maintenance, and you're just hungry all the time. All you think about is food, wanting treats, and hunger has consumed your mind. This is where you will take any advantage that you can get. And if protein makes you feel a little bit more full and a little bit more satisfied, you're going to take that advantage. So protein is our ally at any point during the fat loss phase, but especially as we go into deeper deficits, which is required to burn more fat because our body adapts over time. And if we're just on really long fat loss phases, where again, that kind of goes hand in hand with being at a bigger deficit. But the longer we're going, the more we're going to want to eat more food, the more hungry we're going to be. And protein can help us feel more satisfied and fuller. And that's why we want our numbers to be high. Now, again, it just goes back to the guidelines that I covered a little bit ago. Those numbers are the top end of things, and they will provide that fullness and satisfaction or satisfying feeling. But stay at those numbers because you want any help that you can get. Now, there's also another kind of food source or nutrient that helps us feel that way, and that is fiber. But I will cover fiber on its own at a different time. So there's no need to worry about that right now. Another reason why protein is so important during a fat loss phase is the thermic effect of protein. So this sounds kind of complicated, but all the thermic effect means is how much energy it actually takes to digest the food, assimilate the food, disperse the food that we're eating. How much energy does it take to turn the food that we're eating into usable energy, right? There's a lot of processes that go on during the eating of food. Think about chewing, swallowing, digesting, peristalsis in the stomach, which means the mashing of food, pushing that food into the intestines. There's a ton of stuff that goes on in the intestines then. We don't need to get into it, but releasing of enzyme, releasing of certain acidic and alkaline components. And this takes a lot of energy, right? It's a ton of steps and it's energy intensive. And it actually makes a difference what kind of macronutrient you're digesting or ingesting. That macronutrient is going to, how much energy it takes to break down that macronutrient is going to differ. So for fat, it takes very little energy to digest and then release it throughout the body. Carbohydrates, it takes a decent amount. Protein, it takes a lot. It takes about 20 to 30% of the calories from protein just to process it within the body. So this is amazing, right? So if we eat 100 calories of protein, which would be 25 grams of protein, 20 to 30 of those calories are just used in the digestion process alone, leaving you with only 70 to 80 usable calories. So that means if you're in a calorie deficit and a fat loss phase, eating an adequate amount of protein will slightly increase your total energy expenditure due to the thermic effect of food, due to the thermic effect of digesting protein. So it's almost like you eat more protein, you're going on mini walks throughout the day. Again, that furnace sort of idea. The protein makes the furnace burn stronger. Another reason why protein is so awesome. So I hope you felt the protein just oozing out of me in this video. You can tell I'm fired up about protein, and I've just seen how valuable it is to me and other clients during fat loss phases in particular to preserve as much muscle as possible. And that's why I work out to, yes, to be strong, but muscle plays a role in being strong. And I love the look of muscle. I train very hard to get it. I want to keep as much of it as possible. Even when I burn body fat, I want to show off my muscle. So I'm going to do whatever is needed to keep as much of that as possible. All right. So remember that protein is always important because of the amino acids it breaks down into. They play essential roles within the body. But we don't just want the amino acids to maintain homeostasis. We want to grow and preserve those muscle fibers. And in order to do that, we need more resources. This isn't a problem when we're eating a lot of food, right? Our total energy is high, our protein is likely high too. But when we want to lose fat and we need to reduce energy, we don't want our muscles to be used as that energy. So we need to maintain adequate protein levels to give us the best chance as possible to maintain as much muscle mass as possible. So how much protein do we need? On average, you're going to be very good if you're within 1.6 to 2.2 grams per kilogram of total body weight, or 0.73 to 1 gram per pound of body weight. If you're very muscular or very highly trained, meaning you do very intense workouts, you can increase the amount of protein you take in a day to 2.3 to 3.1 grams per kilogram of lean mass. Remember the difference of lean mass. Go back if you don't remember that. Or 1.05 to 1.4 grams per pound of lean mass. So it's a bit higher than just the average person. Even if we're at the average though, and we're muscular, we're still going to be probably pretty good. So protein goes beyond just giving us that really good chance to preserve as much muscle as possible. it also helps us feel full and satisfied, right? If you're in week 3 of the fat loss phase, you might be like, I'm feeling good. This is easy, right? I can keep going. But when you're in week 20, you're going to want all the help that you can get. And if going higher in your protein provides even a 5% curbing of your hunger and a 5% increase to your satisfaction after a meal, I think it's well worth it, right? Protein doesn't only make us feel full for longer, though. It also requires more energy to digest, right? The thermic effect of food. Protein's at the top. It takes the most energy to digest protein versus the other macronutrients. So think about that as free mini cardio sessions throughout the day as you're eating your protein, right? So I hope I've convinced you as to why protein is so important, especially during a fat loss phase. I hope protein is now your best friend. I hope you prioritize protein to be able to protect your muscle and to be armed with the information to live the healthiest and happiest life that you can. Thank you.